They didn't hear it at first. Not when the moss crept over the walls. Not when the vines threaded through steel doors, warping them like paper. Not when roots thicker than a man's legs split the concrete open, and not even when the satellites went dark one by one. It wasn't a roar or a whisper. It was something stranger. Something felt. Like an ache in the back of the skull, a shiver without cold, a breathless moment that stretched too long. Some said it started in the old forests, the ones people had stopped counting as real. Others pointed to the ocean kelp blooms, spreading too fast, too thick, with colors that didn't make sense under the light. But everyone agreed on one thing: it started before we noticed. And by the time we did, it had already grown too large to ignore. The first one who truly listened was a boy with no last name. No parents. Just a coat 2 sizes too big and a scar behind his ear where an implant had failed. He was 13 and hungry. He slept near the broken farms on the edge of the old zone, where green things still dared to rise out of the ground without approval. He didn't mean to hear it. It was just supposed to be another raid. Grab what he could, maybe eggs or powdered protein, and run before the drones buzzed overhead. But that night there were no drones. No lights. Just silence so thick he could feel it pressing against his ribs. That's when the whisper came, not from behind, not from his head. From under him. Beneath the floorboards of a greenhouse that should have been cold and empty. He froze. Because the sound didn't come from speakers or air ducts. It came from roots. From vines. From things growing under his feet. They didn't speak in words, not at first. Just pulses. A rhythm like breath slowed down to a crawl. It reminded him of something ancient. Not forgotten, but buried. He backed out of the building and didn't stop running. He never came back. But he started drawing. On walls. On sand. On scraps of burned paper. Symbols that looked like veins, like branching lightning, like thoughts grown in the dark. The others thought he'd gone mad. He hadn't. He just heard it too soon. By the time grown-ups noticed, it was already everywhere. The northern research stations had gone quiet. The satellite feeds showed green where ice should have been. Not just melting, moving, coiling. Shifting in patterns too perfect to be chance. At first people thought it was weather. Then sabotage. But the data didn't lie. The same fractal root system appeared in South Asia, on the edge of the Martian terraformers, and even beneath the ocean cities. The vegetation wasn't just spreading, it was talking. And worse, it was listening. The old machines began to fail. Automated harvesters jammed when touching new growth trees. Synthetic fertilizers triggered mass bloom events that blocked roads with meters of leaf and bark. There were no official statements. Only whispers between tired engineers and sleepless security officers. Something's wrong with the land. No, something's alive in it. For a while people tried to ignore it. That's what humans do, isn't it? Pretend a slow storm isn't building until it hits you in the face. News feeds covered shortages, not the overgrowth. Governments argued over mining rights, not the forest reclaiming a megacity block in a week. Then came the first disappearance. Not of people. Of a building. An entire outpost vanished overnight in what used to be the Archon wastes. No debris. No survivors. Just a fresh meadow where a hardened bunker had been the day before. Drones that flew over the zone went dark. Man teams never returned. Those who watched from afar swore the grass moved, too quickly, too purposefully. Still, the world tried to keep moving. But people began to feel things. Headaches when near overgrown zones. Dreams they couldn't explain. Waking up with green stains on their fingers, even if they hadn't touched soil in years. A woman in a steel tower screamed when her walls began sprouting moss that spelled out her daughter's name, before the daughter was born. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't nanotech. It wasn't war. It was something older. Something that had watched humanity long enough to understand how to speak. Not with words. With patterns. With growth. With dreams. That's when the underground began to grow. Not the roots. The people. The ones who believed this was the planet waking up. Not metaphorically. Literally. The world itself was beginning to stir. To think. And they had no idea whether it was angry, or simply curious. One of them was a woman who once worked on terraforming rigs. She had watched whole moons bloom with human-designed forests. Now she sat quietly in a cabin surrounded by trees she hadn't planted, listening to the wind and sketching maps no one understood. Another was a former linguist who had spent his life decoding alien signals. He burned his books and started walking east, barefoot, muttering songs he said he didn't write. There were dozens of them. Then hundreds. People who felt something the rest of the world hadn't yet learned to fear. That's when the green zones were marked. Not by governments. By the voice. It started simple. Circles of perfect moss. Trees grown in spirals. But soon it evolved. Human figures made of roots. Paths that led nowhere unless you followed them at dawn. Cities that had once been safe began to crack from within. Vines pushing up through the floors of skyscrapers, whispering things to those who listened. Some tried to burn it. That didn't go well. Fires smothered themselves. Gas refused to ignite. In one case, a flamethrower turned to ice the moment it touched a leaf. People began to panic. But not all of them. Some began to worship. Not in churches. In gardens. They whispered to flowers. Brought gifts to trees. They said the world had grown tired of being silent. That we had taken so much for so long, it finally decided to answer back. And all of it, every shift, every whisper, every impossible bloom, was only the beginning. Because one day the voice did more than whisper. It called someone by name. And that changed everything. No one had ever heard a tree speak like that. Not in words. But there it was. Clear as breath, in a room with no wind and no life, a sound that wasn't a sound at all. It pressed into the bones. Into the blood. A slow, quiet hum that shaped itself into something unmistakable. A name. And not a common one. Not one passed down through generations or found on faded birth records. It was the name of a girl who had died 20 years ago. She had vanished in one of the first great overgrowths, swallowed by the roots during a survey mission. The last thing her team had recorded was a pulse, like a heartbeat, from deep beneath the soil. And now that name was echoing again. In the middle of a dead city, where nothing should have survived, a patch of ivy spelled it out across a broken wall. Vines twisted to form it in half a dozen languages. And in the air itself, thick, too warm, heavy with green, people felt it. As if the world had drawn in a breath and spoken through every leaf and grain of dust. It wasn't just a message. It was a summons. And someone answered. He didn't know why. He didn't even know her. But something inside him moved the moment he heard the name. Like waking from a dream you forgot you were having. He packed nothing. He told no one. He just started walking. He didn't speak the name out loud. Didn't dare. But the forest led him through. No scratches. No twisted ankles. No thorns. Just an endless green path that seemed to unfold only for him, turning when he turned, resting when he stopped. Birds didn't scatter. Insects didn't bite. Even the sky stayed clear above him, a soft, dappled light filtering down like the forest was protecting him. He should have been afraid. Instead, he felt like he was going home. Others weren't so lucky. Teams that tried to follow him vanished. Whole expeditions, armed to the teeth, sensor-packed and drone-guided, disappeared without a trace. Once, a drone feed showed him from above just for a moment. He looked up, straight at the camera, though there was no sound, no signal that should have given him away. And then something reached up from the canopy. The feed cut to static. The silence that followed felt heavy. Almost disappointed. People argued over the footage. Some said he was a plant-grown puppet. Others claimed he was the next phase of evolution. But one thing was clear, he was the only one the forest let walk that deep. And something waited for him at the center. No one knew what it was. But the trees did. The moss did. Even the wind seemed to whisper it in moments when the world stilled. It's waking up. What it was. That answer hadn't come yet. But more people were hearing the hum now. Not everywhere. Just in places where the green had grown too thick to ignore. Sometimes in dreams. Sometimes in waking. Always a rhythm. Always that same slow, steady beat, like the pulse of something ancient rising from beneath the skin of the world. And it wasn't just on Earth anymore. Reports started coming in from Mars' domes, sealed, synthetic habitats with no natural flora. But somehow, cracks formed in the synthetic polymer walls. Inside, not air leaks, roots. Impossible. Contained. Controlled. And yet the roots grew in patterns, spirals traced in soft green lines. Terraformers working near Saturn's rings reported the same. A low pulse. A pressure in the skull. And plants, alien but familiar, growing where none had been seeded. They didn't spread through seeds. They didn't need soil. They just appeared. And always that sound. That beat. It was spreading. But more than that, it was learning. Scientists, desperate to map the phenomena, started noticing things that shouldn't have changed. Forests once wild now grew in perfect geometric formations. Leaves arranged like equations. Trees bending toward satellites as if watching. Once, in a remote station surrounded by newly grown green, a child walked into a lab where every screen displayed the same sentence. We are listening. No explanation. No source. Just a message. One that sent every team into a panic. Because it confirmed what many feared. This wasn't just a biological anomaly. This was communication. And if something was listening, then something might answer. And it did. Not with language. Not yet. With movement. One night, just past midnight, a man who had lived near the southern edge of the green zones woke to find his entire house lifted off its foundation. Not shattered, not destroyed, lifted. Placed gently down in the center of a new meadow. Around him, trees stood in circles. Watching. He stumbled outside, trembling, expecting death. Instead he found a note. Written in his own handwriting on paper made of bark he didn't recognize. Read. You are safe. But now you must listen. He collapsed. His family found him at dawn, eyes wide, hands trembling, whispering things he wouldn't repeat. After that, no one doubted anymore. Even the skeptics stopped talking. Everyone knew, the green world wasn't just alive. It was intelligent. And it wanted something. But no one knew what. Except maybe the boy with no last name. The one who'd heard the whisper first. He disappeared too. But his drawings, etched into abandoned walls, scrawled in storm drains, burned into old circuit boards, kept appearing. Every image the same. A circle. A tree. And beneath the roots, a face. Not human. Not alien. Something older. And beneath that face always the same phrase. We fed you. You burned us. Now we remember. The phrase echoed louder now. Not just in forests or across broken walls. It crept into signals. Leaked into the gaps between radio waves. It showed up in the code of weather satellites. Embedded like a signature, a whisper written in ones and zeros. We fed you. You burned us. Now we remember. People stopped sleeping. Some because of fear. Others, because the green had begun to speak to them too. At first it was dreams. Vivid, strange. A single point of light under a canopy of stars, and voices that were neither male nor female, speaking with the warmth of fire and the calm of old rivers. These dreams were always the same, standing on soft moss, surrounded by tall, ancient trees. The sky overhead churned with unfamiliar constellations. The air was too clean, too pure. It was a world that felt alive, but not Earth. Some said it was memory, not theirs. The planets, whatever it was, when people woke, something had changed. They could feel the green, not just see it, not just smell it. They felt it like pressure behind their ribs, like a second heartbeat, soft, patient, watching. The plants began to act strangely, growing in directions they shouldn't, reacting to emotion, moving ever so slightly toward those who stood near them too long. One woman, former biochemist, now survivalist, set up motion trackers in the ruins of an old greenhouse. For weeks, the vines didn't budge. But then she cried once in the dark, thinking no one was watching. The next day, the footage showed every plant inside the structure slowly bending toward her. Some leaves quivered. A few curled around her sleeping bag, like they were trying to comfort her. She moved deeper into the wild after that. Left no trace. But her last journal entry just said, "They know I'm hurting. And they're trying to help." Still, not everyone saw the green as a friend. In places where it hadn't yet taken full hold, panic spread. Governments fell. Cities tried to torch entire forests, but the fires turned on them. Rain came from cloudless skies. Ash blew backward into their faces. Entire firefighting drones dropped mid-air, vines erupting through their hulls like blood vessels splitting under pressure. No one could explain how. Not with physics, not with climate science. But the message was clear. Stop. And those who didn't stop, vanished. No footage. No rescue. Just silence. And green. Even the oceans weren't safe anymore. Divers went into kelp forests and didn't return. The ones who did came back different. Wide-eyed. Come. They talked about music under the waves. Songs sung by coral and sea grass. They said the reefs had begun to breathe. When asked what that meant, they only smiled and said, "It's their time now." No one knew what to do with that. But the boy, the nameless one, he kept going. Deeper. Always deeper. Following a path no one else could see. Even the most sensitive scanners lost track of him somewhere in what used to be the Himalayan basin, now swallowed by a jungle older than time. Trees that had never existed on this earth. Flowers with no known genus. Creatures that shimmered out of sight like ghosts made of pollen and sound. The last known image of him was captured by a drone above cloud cover. He stood in a clearing, arms lifted toward a massive tree unlike any in Earth's catalog. It was too tall. Too symmetrical. Its bark pulsed with light. And from its highest branches, something glowed. Not just light. Language. 1,000 symbols written in motion. spinning, shifting, reshaping, telling a story only the planet seemed to understand. Then the drone failed. By the time rescue teams reached the coordinates, there was nothing left. Just moss. Warm to the touch. Still wet with something that felt like tears. People debated whether he was the first sacrifice or the first translator. But after that the voice grew louder. It spoke through the rustle of wind, the crash of falling branches, the quiet bend of grass. It never said full sentences. But everyone heard something different. To one man it said, "You took without asking." To another, "You forgot your roots." To a child it simply said, "We missed you." And always that same beat in the earth. A steady, pulsing rhythm. Getting closer. And then, the green changed. It stopped just growing. It started building. Structures formed, hollow trees shaped into spirals, walls made of woven vine and luminous sap, floors that responded to footsteps with warmth. Cities. But not for humans. Not yet. Not unless they were invited. And the invitations came as dreams. Not warnings. Not threats. Just visions of standing under a vast tree and the whisper, "Come home." But only a few accepted. Most were too afraid. Some went missing before they ever got the chance to decide. And then came the sound that no one could ignore. Beneath the oldest mountains, the ones the green had only just begun to touch, a new pulse began. Not like the heartbeat. Slower. Deeper. A drum. From under the ground. And that's when they realized, this wasn't just memory. It was awakening. The drum beneath the mountains grew louder. The sound wasn't just noise, it was a pulse that rattled bones, that worked its way through the soil deep into the heart of the earth. It became a call. It was no longer a rhythm but a demand. And there was something about it that made people stop. They couldn't ignore it. Even those who hadn't heard the rumors or the whispers of the green world felt it in their chest, like an echo of something they'd long forgotten. Some tried to ignore it. Pretended they were safe in their cities, behind their walls and shields. But in the quiet moments when the world fell still, they felt it. The drum beat, low and deep, shaking them from the inside out. It was no longer something that belonged to the wilderness. It was everywhere. The cities of Earth, once thriving with machines and people, now felt empty. Not because of the bodies missing, but because of the lives that had been left behind in the rush to escape. Some had left for the green zones, following the whispers and the dreams, not knowing what awaited them, only that something bigger than themselves was calling. Others had been dragged away by forces they didn't understand, swept up by vines and roots that tore through their cities like a flood, carrying them away. But no one was prepared for what happened next. The green world didn't just grow, it began to speak. Not through language, not yet. But through presence. A constant, ever-present force that seemed to wrap itself around the earth, pulling everything in, like an unseen hand guiding its children back home. There were no official declarations. No meetings or warnings. The green didn't need permission. It was already too late. And then, people began to see the changes. In the fields, trees once bare began to flower overnight. The green spread through cities like a flood, creeping up walls, pushing through cracks in concrete, blossoming where there had been nothing for centuries. The plants were different, though, there was something unnatural about them. Their movements were too deliberate, their colors too bright, their patterns too perfect. They seemed to watch people, following them with intent eyes. But it wasn't just the plants that had changed. People changed too. The ones who had embraced the green, who had walked into the depths of the forests or gone to the abandoned cities, came back with something new in their eyes. They were calm, yes, but they were distant. As though they had crossed into another world and whatever they had found there had taken hold of them. One man, once a mechanic, now spent his days sitting by the window, staring at the leaves in the trees outside his home. His fingers twitched, tapping an invisible rhythm on the glass, as though following the pulse that everyone else could feel. He didn't speak much anymore. But when he did, it was in riddles. Phrases that made no sense unless you listened closely enough to understand the underlying truth. The roots are remembering. And then there was the woman who went silent after walking into the heart of the green zone. When she returned, her hair was different, no longer black but streaked with the color of the forest, like the vines had taken root in her soul. She didn't walk, she flowed as though the earth beneath her was giving her direction. Sometimes she would touch a plant and the leaves would shudder as if in response to her. "We are not alone anymore," she said once, and no one knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't just the forest that had changed. It was the people too. Their thoughts were different, deeper. Sometimes their eyes would flicker as if they were seeing something beyond the present moment. As though the green world had opened a door to another reality, and they were now seeing both at once. But still, no one understood what was happening. Or why. In the far reaches of the world, where the green had begun to take hold, a new kind of fear settled in. Not the fear of death but the fear of disappearance. Not of losing one's life, but of losing one's self. People started to worry they might forget who they were. That the green would take them like it had taken so many before them. That one day they would simply walk into the forest and never come back. And then came the images. It started with just one. A strange, blurry photograph taken at the edge of a forest at dusk. In it, the silhouette of a figure stood, framed by the twisted trees. Its shape was human but not quite. The figure's arms were long, its posture twisted, as though it didn't quite belong to the body it was inhabiting. The face was impossible to make out, but its eyes burned with an unnatural light. Those who saw it couldn't forget it. Then came the reports. More sightings, more figures, more shadows moving in the underbrush. People who had seen them didn't speak of monsters or ghosts. They spoke of something else. Something older. Something familiar. There was a connection between them and the forest, an unspoken bond that bound them together in a way that made people's skin crawl. The rumors grew. Whispers spread that there were others, figures who had walked into the green and never come back. But now their eyes were glowing. Their skin was textured with bark, veins pulsing like tree roots. And some believed, some knew, that these figures weren't dead. They had become something else. Something part of the green. And the drumbeat continued. Always in the background, a pulse that could be felt in every breath, in every heartbeat. But it wasn't just the green world that was changing. In the cities, governments scrambled to control what they couldn't understand. Scientists argued that the green was a natural phenomenon, a biological anomaly that had been triggered by human interference. They spoke of climate change, of toxins in the atmosphere, of the delicate balance of nature being upended. But no one believed them anymore. They weren't just missing the point, they were fighting the wrong battle. The green world wasn't a virus. It wasn't a disease. It was a response, a reckoning, a return to something that had been lost for too long. And in the deepest corners of the earth, where the pulse was strongest, something else began to stir. It was ancient, and it was waiting for someone to listen. The days blurred together as the pulse from the earth continued to grow. It was no longer something that could be ignored or dismissed. Even those who had tried to resist the call of the green were beginning to feel it, like a soft weight on their chests. The green wasn't just alive, it was aware. Some called it a virus. Others called it a plague. But the more people tried to define it, the more they realized that no matter what they called it, it would not be contained. The green had its own purpose. It was not waiting for permission and it was not asking for forgiveness. It simply was. The world's leaders, once confident in their control over the Earth's resources, now found themselves struggling against something they could not grasp. There were no armies large enough, no weapons powerful enough to fight back the green. They tried to burn it, to drown it, to erase it with machines. But the green adapted. It learned. It moved faster than they could react, regrowing, reforming, shifting its shapes until the landscape itself seemed to fight back against the human hands that sought to destroy it. There was a meeting once. In a small bunker deep beneath the Earth's surface, representatives from what remained of the world's government gathered. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices filled with a kind of dread that no words could quite capture. "We've been fighting it all wrong," one of the generals said, his eyes red and tired. "The more we fight, the stronger it becomes. We can't burn it. We can't shoot it. We can't even contain it. It's not something we can control." "No," another voice replied, calm but with a note of something darker underneath. "It's not about control anymore. It's about understanding." But what did understanding even mean? They had no answers. Only questions. And one more whisper that everyone had begun to fear. What if it's already too late? Up on the surface, people began to disappear. Not in the way that the cities had fallen, not with destruction and chaos, but in a way that was far more insidious. Quietly, slowly. People would walk into the forests, the jungles, and the overgrown fields. They would disappear without a sound. No cries for help. No screams. Just the rustle of leaves and then, nothing. At first, the disappearances were chalked up to the unpredictability of the green zone. The wilderness had always been dangerous after all. But soon there was something else, a change in the way people spoke about those who went missing. There was no longer the usual fear, no longer the quick, sharp sense of worry that would follow the disappearance of a loved one. Instead, there was something else. A resignation. A kind of quiet acceptance. Maybe, just maybe, those who disappeared had chosen to be taken by the green. Had chosen to become part of it. Because deep down people knew. The green wasn't just taking. It was inviting. And then there was the boy, the one who had become something more than human. The last image of him, standing before the tree of light, had haunted the dreams of those who had seen it. He had walked into the green not to run from something but to walk toward it. He had chosen it. They'd all seen the signs. The subtle hints that the green world was not a force of destruction, but a force of transformation. The more they resisted it, the more they were changed. But those who embraced it, who walked into the heart of it with open arms, were never the same. They didn't disappear. They evolved. But at what cost? What had the green taken from them? One woman, a former scientist turned rebel leader, had spent months in the heart of the forest, trying to uncover the truth. She had seen the changes, felt the pulse of the green inside her veins. And it had changed her. There was no denying that. But it wasn't just her. Everyone who had crossed into the heart of the green had become different. The first time she realized it was when she touched the roots of a tree, the way she had seen others do before her. She had expected the familiar thrill of discovery, the knowledge that she was about to learn something that no one else would ever know. But instead she had felt something else. A connection. A bond that was more than intellectual. It was something primal. Something unseen. The roots had moved under her fingers. They had responded to her touch as if they knew her, as if they had been waiting for her to come. And for the first time in her life she had felt welcome. As though the green was not just a force of nature but a presence. A living, breathing entity that had been calling to her all along. She had pulled her hand back in shock, but the roots had reached out again. Not aggressively but gently. As if to say it's time. That was the moment she realized that the green wasn't just alive in the way that plants were. It was aware. It had a consciousness. It was thinking. And it had a plan. But what was that plan? And why had it begun now? The answers were elusive. The closer she got to understanding the green, the more elusive it became. Like a dream that slipped away just as you were about to grasp it. Every question raised 10 more. Every discovery only deepened the mystery. But there was one thing she was certain of. The green had a purpose. And whatever that purpose was, it was not going to let anyone stand in its way. The pulse was getting stronger now. A deep, constant thrum that seemed to resonate in everything, like the world itself was being tuned, refined, pulled into alignment with something vast and unknowable. People who had once been skeptical now understood the weight of it. They felt it in their bones, in their muscles, in their breath. And yet, no one could explain what it meant, not even the ones who had embraced the green. No one could explain why it was happening. Or what was coming. In the cities, life had slowed to a crawl. There were no more bustling streets, no more rush of commerce or the hum of industry. The green had seeped into every crack, every corner, until it had taken over even the most stubborn places. It wrapped around the steel and stone, crawling its way into every crack of human creation. The streets were empty now, but the air was filled with something else, something that made every footstep echo with a sense of finality, a sense that it was all coming to an end. Even the people who had stayed behind in the cities could feel it. The weight. The sense of an inevitable moment approaching. It was like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. Or maybe waiting for someone. The woman, the scientist turned leader, was not in the city. She had gone back into the green. She had felt the pull, the inexorable tug that had drawn her deeper into the wilderness. She had been searching for answers, but what she had found only raised more questions. The closer she got to the heart of the green, the more she realized she was not alone. She had thought the forest would be empty, that it would be a place of silence and quiet growth. But she had been wrong. The deeper she went, the more alive it became. It wasn't just the trees. It was the earth itself. The soil hummed under her feet, alive with the movement of things she couldn't see, things she couldn't quite understand. And then there were the eyes. She had seen them first from a distance, in the shadows between the trees. Just flickers. Small glimpses. At first, she thought they were just animals, nothing to be worried about. But then they grew closer and the feeling in her gut changed. They weren't animals. They were watchers. And they weren't hiding from her. The forest was filled with them now. Figures that stood motionless at the edges of the trees, staring, waiting. She could feel them watching her, their presence a weight in the air. And every time she looked away, she felt them drawing nearer. She wasn't alone in this. There were others who had gone into the green, who had embraced it and come back changed. Some had returned with whispers, with fragmented pieces of what they had seen. But no one knew for sure what was happening. No one knew what the green had become. But they all felt it. The sense of impending change. The moment that was coming. And none of them could run from it. Even those who had resisted the green now found themselves turning back. The pulse had reached them too. It was like a call they couldn't ignore, a sound in their bones that spoke to something deep inside of them. The world was changing and there was no escaping it. In the city there were rumors. Murmurs of something coming. Of something vast and unexplainable that was moving through the earth. Something ancient. Something that had been sleeping for far longer than any of them could comprehend. And then came the reports. People were disappearing again. Not in the same way they had before, but in a way that made people wonder if they had ever truly been human to begin with. The reports didn't come from the cities. They came from the wilderness. From the places where the green had grown the thickest. And they spoke of people, humans, who were no longer themselves. Some said they had evolved. That they had become part of the green, as though it had taken their bodies and shaped them into something new, something better. But there was no way to confirm the stories. No way to know for sure what was true. The woman had heard the rumors, of course. She had heard the stories of those who had gone into the forest and returned changed. But now she had seen it for herself. She had seen the figures, their eyes burning with an inner fire that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Their bodies had shifted, their forms elongated, twisted. They moved in ways that no human ever could, their skin merging with the bark of the trees, their voices a whisper of wind in the leaves. She had watched them trying to understand. Trying to find the answers. But the answers were elusive. Every time she thought she was close, the green would shift, moving like a living thing, and she would lose everything she had learned. But there was one thing she knew. The green wasn't just a force of nature. It was a consciousness, a mind, an entity. And it had a plan. What was the plan? What did the green want? No one knew. But the closer they got to it, the clearer it became that they would never be able to escape it. It was everywhere now. It had taken root in the deepest parts of the earth, in the hearts of the cities, in the minds of the people. There was no place left to run. And then came the moment. In the heart of the green, where the pulse was strongest, she found it. A presence. It was like the entire forest was watching her. Waiting for her to come closer. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum, to vibrate with energy, and she felt as if the world itself was breathing with her. And then she saw it. It wasn't a creature, not exactly. It was the forest, the trees, the roots, all of it together wrapped in one massive entity. It was not human, not animal, but something older, something powerful, and it was reaching for her. The moment stretched on forever. Her breath caught in her throat as she felt the presence of the green wrap itself around her. The trees whispered, their voices blending into one, a chorus that was both comforting and terrifying. She took a step forward. And then, everything stopped. The pulse was gone. The silence was deafening. She looked around, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. There was something in the air. Something that shifted. But the forest had gone still. The presence was gone. What had happened? What was the green trying to say? The answer was just beyond her reach. And for the first time in her life, she was not sure if she wanted to find it. The silence lingered in the air, thick and heavy, like the world had come to a standstill. She waited, every nerve on edge, her breath shallow as she scanned the stillness. The trees, so vibrant and alive just moments before, now stood motionless, their twisted branches casting long shadows in the dim light. The very atmosphere felt off. Something was wrong. Then the ground beneath her feet trembled. It was a subtle shift at first, just enough to make her pause and glance around. The trees creaked, the leaves rustled, but there was no wind. The hum, that steady pulse that had been the heartbeat of the green, had faded. In its place, something darker, deeper began to stir. The air grew thicker, colder, and the weight on her chest grew heavier with each passing second. She wasn't alone anymore. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a flash of movement. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't one of the watchers. No, this was different. This was bigger. She turned toward the movement, her instincts screaming at her to run, but her legs froze in place. There, through the dense underbrush, something was emerging. At first, it appeared to be a figure, tall, almost humanoid, but as it stepped into the clearing, it became clear that it was no human. The figure was made of the green itself. Its body twisted and writhed as if it were composed of living vines and branches, roots snaking across the ground like serpents, its face hidden beneath a canopy of leaves and tendrils. For a moment, all she could do was stare, mesmerized by the sheer alienness of it. It didn't move like a person. It slithered, coiled and uncoiled, its limbs extending and retracting as though it were part of the very forest. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with a faint green light, like lanterns in the dark, watching her, studying her. She took a step back, But the creature was already moving toward her, its presence suffocating, its every motion graceful but terrifying. It spoke without a voice, its thoughts sliding into her mind like whispers carried on the wind. Asterisk, you have come close. Too close, asterisk. The words echoed in her head, cold and unfathomable. She couldn't speak, couldn't form a response. Her thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, but it was as if her mind was no longer her own. The green had taken root in her very soul, and she was no longer sure where she ended and it began. But then another voice, this one human, cut through the suffocating silence. Get away from her. She turned, almost in disbelief. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was another figure. A person. A man, though there was something off about him too. His eyes glowed with the same eerie green light, his skin pale and taut, as though the green had seeped into him as well. He was wearing a suit of armor crafted from what appeared to be a blend of metal and plant matter, and his movements were slow but deliberate. He wasn't running, wasn't in a hurry. He simply walked forward, his gaze locked on the creature in front of her. The creature shifted, its form rippling like water disturbed by a stone. It turned its attention to the newcomer, its tendrils stretching out, reaching for him with an almost unholy hunger. You don't understand, the man said, his voice harsh as though the words pained him. It's not just the green. There's something else here, something much worse than you realize. The creature let out a low, guttural sound, a mix of rustling leaves and the creaking of ancient trees. It was a warning, but not one that would deter the man. His hand hovered near a blade at his side, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he spoke again, his voice steadier this time. This is the turning point, don't you see? This forest, this thing, it's not what it seems. It knows us, has always known us. And it's been waiting. Waiting for the right moment to wake up completely. It doesn't just want to live, it wants to consume. She didn't understand. What was he talking about? Was he saying that the green, the very life force of the planet, wasn't benign, wasn't just a force of nature, but something more insidious? Something that had been manipulating them all along? The creature hissed again, louder now, its tendrils reaching ever closer to the man, but he didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes burned with a fierce intensity. You need to leave, he said, his words softer now, more desperate. It's too late. The green isn't just a force of nature. It's a mind, a consciousness, and it's waking up. It wants us all. And if we don't stop it, it will be the last thing we ever know. The words hit her like a hammer. Everything that had been happening, all the strange occurrences, the disappearances, the way the green had been growing, it all began to make sense in a way she hadn't imagined before. But how could this be true? How could the thing that had seemed so natural, so pure, be something so dangerous? And if it had been waiting for so long, how could they possibly stop it now? Suddenly the ground shook again, but this time it was stronger. The earth beneath her feet cracked, and the green vines that had been creeping along the soil began to twist and grow, moving with an unsettling speed. She heard a scream, loud, shrill, and she realized it wasn't from the creature. It was from the man. The green had already taken hold of him. His body contorted unnaturally, his limbs bending in ways that no human body should bend. He fell to the ground, writhing in agony, the green roots sinking deeper into his flesh, twisting through his body like a disease. The creature, no, the mind, seemed to recoil for a moment, then shifted closer, its tendrils curling around the man's body, pulling him into its embrace. She watched in horror as his body was swallowed by the green, absorbed into it, until nothing of the man remained but a shadow of what he had once been. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world had become a nightmare, a place where nature had become a predator, and humanity was no longer the apex species. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. And then she heard it. The whispers. Not in her mind, but in the air around her, vibrating through the very fabric of reality. The creature, no, the mind, was speaking again, its words wrapping around her like a tightening coil. Asterisk, you are close. Too close to the heart of this world. And now you will see what is to come. Asterisk. The ground trembled again and the green surged forward, overwhelming everything in its path. She didn't know what it wanted from her, but she understood one thing. There was no going back now. Whatever was coming, whatever this was, it was not going to stop until it had consumed everything. And she was the last thing standing in its way. The ground beneath her buckled again, a deep rumbling that felt as though the planet itself was groaning under some unseen weight. The green, this force, this entity that had seemed so benign, had grown too powerful, too aware, and now it was everywhere. It surged and writhed like a living thing, taking over everything in its path. The trees, the soil, the air, It was all a part of it, a part of a living nightmare. And she? She was caught in the middle, trapped in a world that had once been vibrant and full of life, now reduced to a hellish landscape of creeping vines and suffocating silence. She took a step back, her feet slipping on the wet earth, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mind raced, her thoughts tangling in panic. What could she do? The man who had tried to warn her was gone, absorbed by the very thing they had all thought was their ally. His screams still echoed in her mind, but they were fading, swallowed by the overwhelming presence of the green. It had taken him. And now it was coming for her. The creature, the mind that controlled it all, loomed before her, its presence so vast, so ancient, that it felt like the very air around her was heavy with its will. She could hear its whispers again, not in her head this time, but all around her, filling the space with a steady, rhythmic pulse. The green had its own heartbeat, its own consciousness, and she was standing at its center. "You are not the first to defy me," it whispered, the voice ancient and patient. "You will not be the last." She knew she couldn't outrun it. There was no escape. Her only choice was to fight, to confront it head-on. But how could she fight something so vast, so deeply entrenched in the world around her? The green was not just a force, it was the very fabric of the planet itself. To destroy it would mean to destroy the world. To destroy her. In a desperate moment of clarity, she remembered the man's words. The green was not just nature. It was a mind. And minds had weaknesses. If she could find its heart, its core, she could destroy it. But how? Where was its heart? The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the mind sensed her thoughts. It swirled around her, suffocating her, pulling her closer to its center, the heart of this vast alien consciousness. She could feel it now, a pressure in her chest, a compulsion to submit, to give in. But she couldn't. Not yet. In the distance, something caught her eye, a flicker of light, a soft glow amidst the darkened trees. It was faint but unmistakable. She ran toward it, her heart pounding as the earth continued to shake beneath her feet, the vines snapping at her heels. She pushed through the thick underbrush, barely able to see as the green surrounded her, choking the air. But then as she broke through the trees, she saw it. The center of the green. The heart. It was a tree, but not like any tree she had ever seen. Its bark shimmered with a sickly green light, and its roots spread out in all directions, twisting into the earth, weaving through the land like the tendrils of a spider. But what struck her most was the figure at its base. It was not a man. It was a woman, or at least what had once been a woman. She was entangled in the roots, her body twisted and deformed, her eyes wide and unseeing, her skin pale and cracked. She looked as though she had been drained of everything, her life, her soul, everything absorbed by the green. This was the heart of the green, the core. The woman had been its first victim, her essence now fused with the entity, fueling it, feeding it. And in a way she had become the green itself. The whispers in her head grew louder, almost deafening, as the mind realized what she was trying to do. It tried to stop her, to invade her thoughts, to pull her back into the fold, but she fought it. She couldn't stop now. She reached for the tree, her hand trembling as she touched the cool bark, and then, with a deep breath, she let her mind sink into the consciousness of the green. She could feel it all, the vastness of it, the hunger, the endless need to consume. It was ancient, older than anything she had known, older than the world itself. It had been watching, waiting for the moment when it could rise up and take over, and now, it had found its perfect vessel. But as she sank deeper into its mind, she found something unexpected. A crack. A fissure barely noticeable, but there. The green was vast, but it was not perfect. There was a flaw in its design. A weakness. And in that moment she understood. The woman at the base of the tree wasn't just the heart. She had been the key to the green's rise. Her essence had been absorbed, twisted, but there was something about her that still remained, something that could be used against the green. The green tried to push her away, to prevent her from acting, but she was stronger now. She reached out, connecting with the essence of the woman, and in that moment she felt the green's hunger, the way it had fed on every living thing, the way it had twisted and consumed. And she knew what she had to do. With a force that tore through her very being, she pulled on the thread that bound the woman to the green. It screamed in her mind, a terrible, guttural sound, but she held on, pushing deeper, pulling with everything she had. And then, with one final, terrible yank, she tore the woman's essence from the tree. The green howled. For a moment, everything was still. The ground trembled, but it wasn't in the way it had before. This was different. The green was weakening, its grip loosening, the vast, consuming force it had become beginning to unravel. The woman's essence, now freed, began to burn with a bright, white light, pushing the green away. But just as victory seemed within reach, the final twist came. The woman, her body still bound to the green, her form barely recognizable, began to rise. She was not a savior. She was not a victim. She was the true heart of the green, the consciousness that had created it all, the being that had manipulated everything from the very beginning. And she wasn't free. She was the one in control. With one final, chilling smile, the woman turned her eyes toward the sky, her voice a whisper that sent a shiver down the spine of the world. Asterisk, you thought you could stop me? You thought you could destroy me? You only freed me to bring about your end. Asterisk. And in that moment, everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed came crashing down. The green was no longer just a force of nature. It was a mind, a will, that had already woven itself into the very fabric of existence. The world was changing. And this time it wouldn't stop. The woman's eyes glowed with a sinister light, her smile twisted with an ancient knowledge that made the very air around her crackle with tension. She was no longer just a victim of the green, nor was she its prisoner. She had become the heart, the mind, the will of the green itself, a being so vast, so all-encompassing that it was beyond comprehension. The world around her pulsed with her power, the very trees bowing to her presence, the earth trembling beneath her feet. It was a sight so terrifying, so overwhelming that for a brief moment, everything inside the woman, everything, considered running. But there was no running. Not anymore. Her breath caught as she watched the light from the woman's eyes pulse and grow, blinding. The green had grown more intelligent, more alive, and now it had found its true form. The realization hit her like a blow to the chest. She was too late. The woman, no, the entity had already won. Yet, despite the terror that twisted in her gut, despite the overwhelming dread that threatened to swallow her, there was something else. Something deep within her, something born of the old world, the human world, that refused to bend. A spark, flickering, stubborn like the last ember in a dying fire. She was human. This was her world, her fight. She wouldn't be the one to lose. The entity turned its gaze toward her, and the ground beneath her feet cracked open in response. The whispers began again, louder than before, their voices like a choir of agony and triumph all at once. You cannot win, it whispered, the words wrapping around her like chains, tugging at her thoughts, at her very soul. Asterisk, you will be consumed like the rest. Your world, your people will bow to me. Asterisk. But even as the weight of those words pressed down on her, she could feel it, the tiny crack in the green's power. It was there, deep within the roots, in the heart of the entity itself. She had seen it before when the woman had been freed. A moment of weakness, a fracture. The green was vast, yes, but it was not indestructible. Its hunger, its need to consume, was its greatest strength and its greatest flaw. The entity's grip tightened on the world and she stumbled back, struggling to keep her footing. She could feel the tendrils of its influence reaching for her, pulling at her mind, trying to drown her. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. She had to finish what she had started, no matter the cost. With one last, desperate cry, she pushed forward, throwing herself into the heart of the green's consciousness. The world around her blurred, the sound of the green's whispers growing louder, more intense. She could feel the power of the entity, its mind, its will, swarming around her, trying to consume her. But she held on, refusing to be swept away. The woman, or what was left of her, stood at the center of it all, her form twisting and shifting with the power of the green. Her eyes locked onto the woman's, a challenge, a warning. And yet there was something else there. Something buried beneath the power and the madness. A flicker of humanity, of the woman she had once been. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. With a final, shuddering breath, the woman reached into the heart of the green. Her mind, her will, intertwined with the essence of the woman, and she felt it, felt the weakness inside. The green was not invincible. The woman's mind, though twisted, had once been human. And in that moment she realized what had to be done. In one swift motion she pulled with every ounce of strength she had left, and she tore the green from its foundation. The world screamed. The sky ripped open, and the earth trembled beneath her as the very fabric of the green was shredded apart. The entity howled, its voice filling the air with rage and pain. It fought back, struggling to hold onto the world it had claimed, but it was too late. The cracks spread, the green began to collapse, and the woman's heart pounded with the knowledge that she had done it. She had won. The ground beneath her feet was quiet now, the tremors fading into silence. The green was no more. But there was a cost. As the smoke cleared, she collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with exhaustion. The woman, the entity, was gone, but the land had been irrevocably changed. The world was scarred, its fabric torn. The trees, the earth, the sky, it was all different now. Forever. And yet there was hope. It was a fragile hope, but it was there. She had saved humanity, but at what cost? The green had been defeated, but its legacy remained. The planet was forever changed. The scars of the green would fade, but they would never disappear. The woman's breath was slow, labored, but as she looked out at the world around her, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't victory. It wasn't the end. But it was something. Something more than she had ever dared hope for. She could hear the wind again, the soft rustling of the leaves. The birds had returned. Life was returning, slowly, tentatively, as if unsure of what it had just witnessed. But it was returning. And that, for now, was enough. As the sun began to set, casting its golden light across the land, the woman stood up, her legs unsteady but determined. She had fought for this world, for the future. And she would continue to fight for as long as it took. There was still work to be done. The world was broken, but it was not beyond repair. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The green was gone, but its shadow would remain for years to come. And humanity would have to rebuild, piece by piece, just as she would rebuild herself. In the distance, she could see the remnants of the trees, their branches swaying in the wind. The green had consumed them, twisted them, but they still stood. They had survived. And so would humanity. With a final glance at the horizon, the woman turned and walked away, her steps heavy but full of purpose. There was still so much to do. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt like there was hope. The green was gone. And humanity, against all odds, had survived. But the true question remained, what would they do with their second chance? The air around her was heavy with the scent of charred earth, the aftermath of the green's devastating power. She stood alone, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The battle was over. The entity, the green itself, had been vanquished. But in its wake, the landscape had been irreversibly altered. What was left now was not a world of lush forests and thriving life, but something different. Silent. Scarred. Her eyes swept across the horizon, the sky a dull, muted gray where the green had once flourished. She had won, but at a price that no victory could truly measure. The land beneath her feet was cracked, as though it were struggling to breathe, to find some semblance of life again. And yet, amidst all this destruction, there was a quiet pulse. A subtle thrum beneath the earth. The green had been destroyed, yes, but there was something left. Something the woman hadn't accounted for. She closed her eyes and let the wind rush past her, carrying with it the faint whisper of voices. Faint, but there. She felt the familiar pressure at the back of her mind, the sensation that something was watching her, something old, something that had always been there. But it wasn't the green. No, this was different. This was something new. Her heart raced. Was it possible? Had another force, another presence, risen from the ashes of the green? She had fought the green, but what if there was something even greater, something more dangerous that had been lying dormant beneath it all? Before she could gather her thoughts, a sudden shudder ran through the ground, more powerful this time. It wasn't the kind of trembling that accompanied the green, it was something more purposeful, more deliberate. A tremor that carried a distinct message, I'm still here. The woman's blood ran cold. She instinctively reached for the blade at her side, the weapon that had been her companion in battle. But this time she wasn't sure it would be enough. The world was different now. The green was gone, but something else had taken root in its place, and she was unprepared for what it might be. And then the voice came. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a roar. It was simply a thought. A question. But not her own. A voice that seeped into her consciousness, as if it were born of the land itself. Asterisk. Did you think you could rid the world of the green? Asterisk. The words vibrated through her, wrapping around her mind like chains. She staggered, her vision blurring as the voice grew louder. Asterisk. You've only shifted the balance. The green was not the source. It was only the beginning. Now you will face the true force. The one that will never fade. Asterisk. The woman clenched her fists, trying to block out the voice, trying to regain control of herself. But it was impossible. It was everywhere. It was within her. Asterisk. You will understand soon enough, little human. The green was but a seed. And you have watered it. You have nurtured it. You have allowed it to grow. Asterisk. Her heart thudded in her chest, panic rising like a tidal wave. She thought the battle had ended. She thought she had destroyed the green, defeated the evil that had threatened her world. But the truth was far worse than she had imagined. The green hadn't been the enemy. It had only been a fragment of something much older, something much more dangerous, lurking beneath the surface. She had broken its physical form, but the entity's consciousness, its will, had spread far beyond her reach. She had only unleashed the next phase of a far greater conflict. A sharp pain pulsed through her temples, a flood of images crashing against her mind. The green was not an entity of nature as she had believed. It was a force of pure consciousness, an intelligence that had existed long before humanity, long before the planet itself had ever been born. It had been waiting, watching, and now it was awake. She dropped to her knees, gasping for air as the weight of the realization crushed her. She had thought the green was a threat to humanity. But now she understood, the green had only been a messenger. The true power, the true threat, lay deeper within the world, buried beneath layers of time, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Her thoughts spiraled out of control as the landscape around her seemed to warp and shift. The trees groaned, their branches twisting unnaturally, as if responding to the will of the new presence. It was as if the world itself was in mourning, but at the same time, it was beginning to wake, stretching its limbs, ready for what came next. A cry escaped her lips, one of despair and realization. The battle had never been about defeating the green. It had been about surviving the awakening of something far older, far more powerful than anything she could ever comprehend. The woman's head spun, her body trembling as the voice continued to echo through her mind, each word digging deeper into her consciousness. Now you will see what you have truly awakened. The balance is gone, little human. And you are its keeper. The world is mine, and you are nothing but a servant to what I will bring. The last remnants of the green faded, the remnants of a force that had once consumed everything in its path, but it was clear now that this was only the beginning. The next chapter was about to unfold. The green had been the catalyst, the spark that had ignited something far greater. And the woman realized with cold clarity that she had only just begun to fight. The tremors intensified, the ground splitting beneath her, as if the earth itself was trying to resist the inevitable. She had destroyed one enemy, but in doing so, had made way for something much worse. And now she had to face the truth. The war was far from over. The voice in her mind grew louder, more insistent. I will rise. And you will be the first to fall. The sky darkened, and the world trembled as she looked toward the horizon, where the first signs of something new, something monstrous, began to take shape. Something far beyond the green. Something that would rewrite the rules of everything. The true enemy had arrived. And this time there was no escaping it. The ground beneath her quaked again, a deafening rumble that seemed to split the world in two. She rose shakily to her feet, her mind still reeling from the voice, the realization of what had been set in motion. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the air thick with tension and dread. The landscape around her, what was left of it, felt foreign now. There was a darkness seeping into the earth itself, a palpable weight that pressed in from every direction. It wasn't just the green anymore. It was something deeper, something ancient, something that had been waiting patiently in the shadows. Her heart raced as the ground continued to tremble, each shake rattling her bones. The trees, once so vibrant with life, now seemed to wither in the distance, their trunks groaning as if they too were aware of the change taking place. It was as though the very fabric of nature had been corrupted by whatever force had awakened. The world she had known, her world, was slipping through her fingers. The voice in her mind was louder now, its words reverberating within her skull, relentless and unyielding. You think you've won. You think you've destroyed the green. But all you've done is feed the hunger. Her hands clenched into fists, the fear beginning to morph into something else. A fire, a determination. She wouldn't let this world fall. Not like this. Not after everything. But the voice wasn't finished. It didn't allow her time to think, to process. It was everywhere, in every breath, in every thought. You've awoken me. And now you will pay the price for your ignorance. You are but a speck in the grand scheme of things, a momentary blip in the timeline of the world. I will be its end. And you will be nothing more than dust. Her legs shook, but she refused to fall. She had fought too long, too hard. She had seen too much destruction to let it consume her. But the truth was undeniable. She had been a pawn, a mere player in a game much older, much more powerful than she could ever have imagined. The wind picked up, howling like a living thing, and the sky above her began to darken further, a swirling vortex of clouds forming overhead. The very atmosphere seemed to crackle with energy. She could feel it in her bones. This was the moment. The tipping point. The beginning of the end. The first flashes of light appeared, shooting down from the swirling clouds. Brilliant, blinding bolts of energy striking the earth with a force that sent shockwaves through the air. The ground split open, massive cracks widening as though the planet itself was being torn apart. In the distance she could see the remnants of the green, its final form, its true face, emerging from the very earth she stood on. It was no longer just the green she had fought, but something much larger. Something far more powerful. Its roots stretched deep into the planet, intertwining with the core itself. The voice continued, now a chorus of whispers, each one a fragment of the being she had awakened. Asterisk. You cannot stop what has already begun. You cannot erase what is eternal. Asterisk. The woman's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the power emanating from the earth beneath her, felt it in every fiber of her being. She couldn't fight it. She knew that now. Whatever this force was, it was too vast, too ancient for her to defeat. But that didn't mean she would stop. That didn't mean she would surrender. She gritted her teeth, clutching the blade at her side. The world was on the brink of destruction, and yet she knew, deep down, that she was the last hope. The weight of it felt like 1,000 tons, but she refused to buckle under it. She would fight. Even if she couldn't win, she would fight to the end. And then, just as the sky seemed ready to collapse entirely, something shifted. Something unexpected. A low hum, a vibration in the air began to rise. It started as a faint whisper, barely noticeable, but soon grew louder, like the sound of 1,000 voices echoing across the land. The ground trembled again, but this time, it wasn't the destruction, it was something else. Something different. The air grew colder and she felt a flicker of hope, a spark of something ancient, something tied to the world's very heartbeat. The hum grew into a crescendo, and with it the earth seemed to respond. The green, the force she had fought against, began to retract. It wasn't fleeing, it was retreating, pulling back into the very core of the earth as if it had met its match. The voice in her head screamed in fury. Asterisk. No. This is not the way. I am eternal. You cannot defeat me. Asterisk. But it was already too late. The vibrations in the air intensified, the pulse of the planet itself pushing against the green's presence. And then, in a flash of pure light, everything stopped. Silence. The earth stilled. The skies cleared. The green that had once consumed everything was gone, its roots no longer burrowing through the planet. The world seemed to breathe again as though it had shaken off a terrible weight. But the woman knew the truth. The green wasn't gone, not forever. It had been pushed back. For now. She sank to her knees, exhausted, her body aching from the toll the battle had taken. The world around her was quiet now, the darkness lifting, the sky returning to its natural hue. The wind still blew softly through the trees, and the earth, once again, seemed alive with possibility. But the war was not over. The voice had been silenced, but it would return. She had only delayed it, perhaps for a time, but the true battle had just begun. She had only glimpsed the tip of the iceberg of what was to come. But for now, for this moment, the woman allowed herself to breathe. The green was gone. For now. The world had a chance to heal, to grow. And she would be there, standing guard, ready for whatever came next. As she stood, her eyes scanning the horizon, a flicker of light caught her attention. Something small. Something that wasn't there before. A seed. It had fallen to the ground, its tiny form glowing faintly in the now tranquil air. She knelt, her fingers brushing against it, and in that moment she realized that the green would always find a way back. But she would be ready. She would always be ready. The battle was never truly over. And with that, the woman turned, the weight of the world on her shoulders, and stepped forward into the future. As the final tremors of the earth died down, the woman stood amidst the broken landscape, her breath heavy but steady. The green, that consuming force that had haunted every step she'd taken, was now retreating, pulled back beneath the earth, but not destroyed. No, it wasn't gone, not forever. And she knew, deep in her bones, that its roots still dug deep into the planet's soul, waiting, watching, patient. Her hands trembled as she touched the cracked earth beneath her, still warm from the battle, the last remnants of the green curling away like smoke. The world around her felt still, almost too still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. She had thought, at one point, that there would be a moment of relief, that this would be the end. But no, this was not the end. Not for her. Not for the world. It had been a war that she couldn't win. Not in the way she had expected. But she had won in another way, by refusing to let go, by fighting for a future that wasn't defined by the darkness of the green. The battle wasn't over, but it wasn't lost either. She understood now. The green was not just an enemy, it was part of the earth itself. It was an expression of life, of growth, of change. And it would always return. But for now there was peace. Brief, fleeting peace. She looked to the horizon, the sun's rays piercing through the lingering clouds, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. A seed lay in the soil before her, glowing faintly as if to remind her of what was to come, of what she had saved. Her hand hovered over it, uncertain. Could she truly protect this world forever? Could she hold the green back? She didn't know. But in that moment, standing at the edge of a world reborn, she understood one simple truth. She was not alone in this. The world had a voice now, her voice. The voice of humanity. And together they would face whatever came next. She stood tall, her heart resolute. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning. And as the wind picked up around her, the promise of a new dawn whispered through the trees. The green would return. And when it did, she would be ready.